Hey there, sugar. Today I'm going to show you how to paint up two mutant kind's most tragic lovebirds. My name's Angela and you're watching Hobby Night. I have been absolutely loving the new X-Men 97, and I knew as soon as I started watching it that I had to come back to Marvel Crisis Protocol because there's a ton of different mutants that you can pick up for that particular game system. And then I saw episode 5 of X-Men 97, and I knew exactly who I needed to paint up. Rogue and Gambit. Two of my favorite characters, to be fair, but also episode 5 made me cry, and I need to immortalize their love in paint. So today I'm going to be painting up Rogue and Gambit for you, and without further ado, let's begin. I'm going to go ahead and start with my sweet Southern belle, Rogue. I love her. She is one of my all-time favorite characters, and you might notice that I've kept her primed in Wraithbone. Now that is specifically because unlike in my previous tutorials where I've used the Grisaille technique and wanted to do the pre-shade method, I actually think that is going to apply too much realism to this model where I am going for a hyper-saturated, cartoony 90s vibe for these models. So I think the Wraithbone is going to work out so much better for that. Now that we've covered how we primed the model, let's go ahead and work on her outfit. Now I love Rogue in all of her outfits, but in particular, MCP went with the green and yellow one, which I also really like. I love working with those colors. So we're gonna start with the green, and pretty much the method for this is going to be across the board for all of our colors. We're gonna start with a contrast color base, and then we're going to blend in via glazing Warpaint's Fanatics colors on top for highlights. Now these Warpaint's Fanatics colors I just bought. I absolutely love them. I picked up the mega set and I think the colors are gonna work beautifully here. And I really like all of the greens in there. There's lots of options for you to choose from. Once I am done with the green on Rogue's outfit, I can move on to the yellow. And I have to call out very specifically here because my method is pretty much the same, contrast base, highlight with yellows. But the new Warpaint's Fanatic yellow is so much better than the previous Army Painters or the Warpaint's yellow. It is just way more opaque. The old one was way too transparent and I like it so much better. So if you've been struggling with yellow, this is definitely one to pick up. Now, once we're done with the yellow and the green, we need to work on her jacket. For this, I'm going to go with snakebite leather as my base. And then I was looking at my mega set and I actually didn't find a super good brown light color tone that I wanted to use as my highlight. So what I ended up going with was actually a tan. And I think this worked really well, but I had to add a lot of the snakebite leather color tone in there to really get it to the brown color I was looking for. Ultimately though, it turned out great, and we can move on to the slightly more complicated painting segment, which is working on Rogue's face. We're actually gonna be working on her whole head, and we're gonna start with the hair, which is a lot easier to deal with. Now, I think contrast colors have a great auburn colored hair, which I think is what Rogue has, which is Gryph-hound orange. I put this on in a single layer and it looks immediately wonderful for that reddish brown color tone of her hair. But for the white, we need to come back in with a pure white, clean up anything that we want to be this color, and then we're gonna go ahead and use Soul Blight Gray. This is probably one of my favorite shades from Citadel because it works so well with creating white fur or hair, as you can see it's doing on Rogue here. Now with her hair done, we need to actually tackle her face. And this is not as big of a challenge as I thought it would be, at least getting her skin tones down. I've been practicing flesh tones a lot recently, and I have found that putting a warm purple color tone down first, and then layering on various tones of peachy colors or whatever flesh tone you're using tends to work really well and gives you a very warm, living complexion, which I really like because sometimes my complexions in the past have leaned really undead, especially when doing very pale complexions. But I didn't really feel like I had that issue here. But what became a struggle was painting the details on her face. MCP gave me a really nicely sculpted face, but frankly, it doesn't quite look like Rogue to me, and I felt that more and more as I continued to work on it because she's smiling for one thing, which was fine enough to paint using a little bit of black on her lips, but it made her cheeks so poofy, and I don't know if I feel like it looks fully like Rogue and more like a cosplayer of Rogue, but regardless, I still think it turned out great. We ended up dotting her eyes with a little bit of white, shading them with a bit of Reikland flesh shade to basically create a little bit of faux makeup there as eyeshadow, putting on some eyebrows, and then coming back in with my secret technique of using a Micron technical pen to dot her eyes. This worked perfectly, and now we can move on to the base. I am loving how Rogue is turning out, but we still have the base and all of the debris that she's punching around to take care of. And for the base, I want to make that explosion look as cool as possible, and we're gonna be doing wet blending in order to achieve this effect. The first step is to paint the entire thing up in yellow. Then we're gonna come in, and while that yellow paint is still wet, we're gonna start mixing in some orange. We're gonna do this by blotting it on with the brush rather than sort of traditionally painting it. I really wanna sort of dab it in there and really blend those colors a little bit naturally and make it look like the explosion is just realistically happening and it's kind of got weird colors in it. Because, you know, if you've ever watched explosions on movies or television or YouTube or whatever, they get really weird and they got a lot of different colors happening in them. But the lighter colors tend to be in the center and it gets darker as it goes out. So with that in mind, now that we have the orange on there, while it's still wet, we're going to continue to add in more colors, this time a deeper red. And I was going with as vibrant of a yellow, orange, and red as I possibly could. And thankfully the Fanatics line has some really good colors for that. I really do highly recommend you check them out. Now, once we have the red on there and that is dried, and I really like the way the blend worked, and I ended up going back in and doing this a bunch, blending with the yellow, the orange, and the red back and forth until I was happy with how the explosion looked. But once that was all dry, we need to come back in and this time add in a dry brush of black. This is gonna give us the start of that smoke that would be forming as the explosion continues. And I really love what this does to the whole fireball at her base. It just brings it to life and it looks so cool. Now, while we have this black paint still out because we were dry brushing, we're also going to go ahead and base everything that needs to be metallic in this color as well, which is mostly the debris that's flying about. Once we're done with that, we can go ahead and come back in with our metal color tone, a nice silver, and paint everything up. From there, we'll add a Nuln Oil wash, and we'll do a little couple details to the orb that she's actually punching, giving it a glaze of red and highlighting it back out with some silver to really bring some detail to it. And with that, Rogue's complete, and we can move on to her lover boy, Gambit. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, especially if you're enjoying the content that you find here. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, well, my Only Fanatics VIP page is currently 50% off through the end of the month for new subscribers. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, use the link in the video description below, and I hope to see you there. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video. All right. Rogue is finished, and we can move on to Gambit. And much like Rogue, he was primed up in Wraithbone for the exact same reason. And we're gonna start with his outfit just like we did Rogue's as well. But this time, I'm gonna do things a little bit differently. Originally, I would normally start with the most recessed areas on the model, which happens to be his shirt. But as I was talking with chat, because I painted Gambit live on stream, we decided that working on his pants first would be better because the darker color tone might be a little bit more of a pain in the butt to cover up if we got it on the pink and we'd already finished that. So we're going to go ahead and start with his pants, applying a nice blue and then highlighting it with some Fanatics blue as well. Once we're done with that, we can move on to the magenta of his shirt and some of the details on his pants as well. And Doomfire Magenta is absolutely the perfect color for Gambit. It is just, it's so him and I love it. So we put that down first, highlight it with some pinks, adding maybe a little bit of white in there, and we can move on to his leather jacket. And actually his cowl first. The cowl is actually, I almost always forget this. We did have to paint his cowl. We did a little bit of light black in there and then mixed it in with some dark gray. Pretty simple, very straightforward, just like we've done everything else. The jacket, however, is where we divide from what we've done with Rogue. Now we still use the same base color. I still wanna go with snakebite leather because I really think snakebite leather works great as a foundation for leather tones. Obviously, hence its name. But this time I decided to go with a deep ochre color tone as my highlight rather than the light tan. And I actually think I like this look a little bit better than what I did on Rogue's. And I'm glad I used it on Gambit because he has a lot more leather jacket to actually paint. It worked fine on Rogue because her jacket's actually quite small. But with Gambit, I was worried that those tan highlights would look a little weird because I wasn't sure how I felt about them. And this goes so much better. The ochre works really, really well because if you actually thin snakebite leather just enough, it looks a little yellow. And that was where my idea for this came from. Once I have the jacket done, we can start moving on to some more of the details and work on his face as well, but this is a lot less complicated than Rogue's. We just finished painting Gambit's leather jacket, and I was looking at my reference and I noticed that his hair color tone actually works perfectly for snakebite leather, according to my reference, and that's what I'm going to use on the hair. Quick easy, and we're done. And then I looked at my reference again and I was about to start on the face and I realized, oh, actually his gloves are black. He doesn't have bare hands, which is great because I also need to paint up some other stuff in black because it's gonna be metallic later on. So let's just go ahead and take care of that first before we even move on to his face. So I do that, paint the gloves in black, paint the staff in black, and then I'm actually gonna go ahead and just take care of all of those metal bits. Now there's actually quite a bit that needs to be metal that we didn't paint in black, but it's already covered in a base color tone, and I sort of touched on this earlier. The blue on his boots is going to get covered in a silver because that's the same color that's supposed to be. He also has a nice silver belt. There's a little bit of like chainmail or metallic color tone on his chest as well, on his shirt. And then of course the staff needs to be painted up in metal as well. When we're done with that, we can finally move on to painting Gambit's face. And I'm going to approach this pretty much the same way that I did Rogue, except for one minor difference. And I actually think this ends up making the steps a little bit easier because there's just a lot less detail I end up needing paint on Gambit. First and foremost, we're gonna start with that purple wash to give us a nice foundation. From there, this is where we're gonna deviate. I'm gonna come back in with that magenta color tone that I used on his shirt, and I'm gonna apply this to his eyes. They glow whenever he's using his mutant powers, and he's currently actively attacking right now with those mutant powers, so I figured this would be perfect. I'm going to spread this color around onto his cheeks a little bit as well, so we really get a glowing effect, like it's bursting out of his eyes. Not quite to the level Scott's would be, but still getting a glow. Now, from there, we can go ahead and start layering on various flesh tones, and because Gambit is a little bit tanner than Rogue is, we're gonna start with some darker fleshes and move into some lighter tones as well, still bringing us up to a highlight. As we get close to his eyes, however, we're going to thin our glaze even more so that we don't lose too much of that pink, and it really sort of looks like it's just painting the top of his cheeks. I really, really like this effect, and it works very, very well. Honestly, from there, we can just move on to his base and do some of the final details. So let's go ahead and do that next. All right, it's time to paint the most complicated thing on Gambit, and that is his attack. Now this actually starts out pretty straightforward. I prime the attack in a pure white because I really want that Doomfire magenta to show up as vividly and true as possible, and the pure white is gonna do that for me. Then, once I have that done, we're gonna coat everything, the effect, the cards, all of it, in that Doomfire magenta. From there, however, this is where things get a little bit complicated and take a little bit more time because I want to make those cards actually look like they have faces on them and that they're not fully engulfed in that pink light. I want to show, because sometimes I see it in all the reference, where the cards look like you can still see the white of them a little bit, but all the details are in that pink color tone. And this takes a little bit of time, but we get it done. The first step is to start layering on some pinks, gradually building those into some white as we get closer to the edge of the cards and they get further away from the energy. Once I'm satisfied with how the blend looks and I have a nice highlight on those edges of the card, moving into the purest white I possibly can, we're gonna come back in with a micron pen again. But this time I'm gonna use one that is also a very, very vivid magenta color tone. And I'm going to dot on various details that I'm gonna try to make look like the faces of the card. Now this works decently well, but I do flub it up a little bit, but thankfully I can come back in with a detail brush with some white paint again and just blend it in and create a little bit more of a better effect so I can end up with an ace, a 5, and a 4 on all of my faces. I love the way this looks. I actually think I succeeded pretty gosh darn well with it. You'll have to let me know down in the comments what you think of them. But after that, the last thing that I need to take care of on the attack is going back in with a little bit of a pink highlight on the actual energy effect that is past the cards, just to give it a little bit more emphasis because I didn't feel like I had quite enough of a glow effect there. After that, we can go ahead and work on the base. This is really simple and his base is super clean. We're going to go with a dark gray on literally everything. Then we're gonna come back in with a black wash, which we're not only going to apply to the base, but I'm also gonna put on all of the metallic elements that I painted up earlier. This helps knock back the shine a little bit and mutes them, but still allows them to look like a true metallic. After the wash is dried on all of those elements, we can come back into the base with a lighter gray and paint this on with a dry brush using a dry brush. We can add this to just that little sidewalk section as well as the debris that Gambit's kicking up where his foot attaches to the base. After that, we just need to rim it in a little bit of black and we can finally look at the completed models. Well, sugar, here they are, Rogue and Gambit. I love the way that these two minis came out, and I hope that it does justice and memorializes what happened in episode 5, because gosh darn it, it made me cry so much. And I had to paint them up, and I actually am really, really pleased with how they turned out. I also am really thrilled to see how well Contrast and the new Fanatics line do work well together. I kind of expected them to, but this was really my first test of trying to use the two paints together, and the vibrancy in both really just complement each other super well. So if you have contrast colors and you've been wanting to up your game a little bit, play with a little bit more highlighting effects, or even add in some other shades, and you want to use some more opaque paints to do it, not sponsored, but the Fanatics paint line is pretty gosh darn good. Overall, I loved painting up these mutants, and frankly, I think I might end up painting up some more because one, I have just genuinely been loving the new X-Men 97 cartoon, but the MCP models are actually extremely fun to paint. There's also just something about being able to work in those really hyper saturated color tones that I absolutely love about comics and cartoons, especially from the 90s, on these models that just sings to me right now. So you can probably expect to see more in the future. Now, before I head out, I do want to give a final thank you to not only my patrons, but also my YouTube members for helping keep the channel going and making so I can keep doing content like this. Your guys' support means the world to me, so thank you very much. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a lovely hobby night, everybody.